Welcome back to another programming video. Today's topic is scope. We're looking at functions and reusability. Let's jump straight to the code. This is VS Code I'm using to run the code and explain the logic. Now, what is a scope? I decided to use to demonstrate what a scope is, and you can kind of hopefully get the come up with a definition of your own based on what I will be demonstrating. Now, I'm gonna be using a function to calculate the area of a rectangle based on values that are being passed via input. And to do that, I'm going to create two variables. The first one is going to be the length, and I'm going to assign it a value of 0. And I'm going to create the width equally and assign it the value of 0. So reason why I'm assigning the value of 0 is simply just so if I decide to use that later on, I know I'm just using numbers and I don't have to deal with strings or converting or doing anything along those lines. So it's pretty straightforward. Now, and yeah, let's just go ahead and output these values so we know what it is that we are passing. Open close bracket, use my little letter F there, and then create the first length. That's going to be length, and then I'm going to open close curly braces and pass in the value of the variable that we created earlier on, and I'll use the width as well, and then pass in the width we created earlier on. So if you run that code, we can see length and width. So far so good. And this is the scope that we high level scope, if we want to think of it that way. So everything here is accessible. You don't have to do anything, and whatever you created before in the previous lines are easily accessible in the next lines of code. No issue. Now I'm going to create a function called area. So def, and I'm going to name it area. And this function takes in two parameters, and I like to call them placeholders because this is just for me to know what values I need to pass in, and I'm giving them meaningful name so that it's easy to trace, especially if you have a lot of lines of code and there's a lot of things to remember. Meaningful name for variables or parameters are key in keeping your head organized and your code organized. So I'm going to use L, short for length, and I'm going to use width, short for W, short for width. And now I'm going to do one thing. First of all, I'm just going to print this. So since we already have that, and Python is highlighting this because we haven't passed in the value that need to be passed in here. So I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to make this L, and I'm going to pass in L, and I'm going to do W just so we know what it is that we're printing and outputting, and I'm going to pass W. So, and just to make sure that we have everything all right, I'm going to pass in the value of 2 here, and I'm going to pass the value of 4. So area, first place L, second place W. So when we run that, we should see this, and we also should see that. So I'm going to run the code. You can see we're getting length 0 with the 0, L2, and W4. Great. Now, what I want to do to demonstrate the scope is that I'm going to create another variable, length, and I'm going to assign that the value of L, basically, and I'm going to create another similar variable, width, right? and I'm going to assign it the value of W. Now, if I hover over this, you can see that the length is not accessed because Python can see that although I've created the variables, but it hasn't been used, and therefore you can even pay attention to the color depending on what your environment configuration is. That the color is slightly dim versus variables that do have actual values or have been used already. So it may not be visible on the video, but that's basically what it looks like. It's a good way, especially if we're using VS Code, to kind of visualize things on the fly and speed up your productivity in terms of coding. Now, because these are not accessed yet, haven't been accessed, so I'm gonna go ahead and copy that and basically just print those values, and then show you. So I'm gonna put that just so we are on the same page, so we know everything with single letter here has to do with the function area, and outside we're dealing with the variable declared outside of this scope. So think of this function as a scope, and the function exists on the high level scope, meaning it can be accessed, but everything on these function is not accessible outside, and we're talking about variables here. Now the other thing I want to do is return this area. So I'm going to take the length, which is the value that we've assigned the value of L2, and I'm going to multiply that to the width, and that's going to be that. So, and that value will be returned, and I need a way to print it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this value, I'm just going to say print, and I'm going to use my good old-fashioned way of displaying things. I'm going to call this area, and I'm going to say open close curly braces, and I'm going to put that in there. So all I'm doing is passing 2 and 4, and I'm going to see if I can add some sort of input here, just to as a way of revision from what we've learned in previous videos. And if you haven't watched them, I highly suggest you go back and watch them on the topic of inputs. Now let me run this, and we can create. So what we can see is that we still have our length being displayed, and we have our values in 4, which is basically the first value being printed here, length and width, and the same is being done here. That's why we have a duplicate in this area. And then we have our area being calculated, and the value is being returned, and it's being displayed here as 8. Now here comes the scope demonstration, which I mentioned at the beginning of this video. If I went ahead and, for example, deleted this, and what you notice is that Python automatically highlights these 2 variables, which now look nothing like variable, as, you know, undefined. Why? It's because although we have length and width defined inside this function, this is a different scope. It's cut out, and only what the function returns will be accessible to the scope outside of the scope. I hope that makes sense. So that is what I meant by variables are created inside a function, only exist inside that function, the local scope. They don't affect the rest of the program unless they return. And that's what I'm trying to achieve here. So if I bring that back, you can see that we have our length and width, and these are not highlighted. And Python even helps you. I mean, visually, you can see that if I click on length, Python trace through and say, hey, we're talking about the same thing here, but it's not highlighting anything outside. Width, it's highlighting the ones and say, hey, we're dealing with the same thing here. And if I click on length there, you can see it to highlight that to say, hey, we're dealing with the same thing. And width and that's how you're also able to tell that we're dealing with different scopes, and some variables are not similar to the other ones, even though they have the same names. Cool. I did mention that I'm gonna show a way of using input here again. So I'm gonna say, let's call these LE, that's gonna be length, short for length, and I'm gonna assign the value of the input, and I'm gonna say enter a length, right? Length, and let's just gonna add a space there, and then I'm gonna copy that, and I'm gonna call this width, and I'm gonna say enter width right here. So, and then I'm gonna use those values to be the parameters that we communicate, that we pass into the function area. But now, something to keep in mind, and maybe let me run that, and then everything will make sense. So I'm gonna clear my console, and I'm gonna run that, and then obviously we're printing these values, and then we've been asked to pass the input. So I'm gonna pass 2 here, and I'm gonna pass 3. And guess what? We're getting a problem. Although these values have been printed as expected, you can see them 2 and 3, but it highlights that there is an issue with our code. And that's because by default, input returns a string. And if you hover over that, you can see the variable str, meaning it's a string. So how do we go about solving this problem? We just surround our input with the keyword int, and we do the same thing here, and we surround that with an int. And now if we run our code one more time, we pass in the value of 2, value of 3, and we get the result 6. Great. I hope that you've learned something new in this example, and you know a thing or two about scope. Until next time, keep well. Bye-bye.